They say the courtroom is where truth is tested, but some truths never make it to the witness stand. Some stay hidden in corners, where a janitor sweeps, listens, and remembers. Raymond Ray Ellis had worked as a janitor for nearly 3 decades, mostly invisible, his brown jumpsuit blending into the marble and glass of Atlanta's most powerful law firms and federal courtrooms. He wasn't a man who spoke much. His mop did the talking, and the silence of his work allowed him to hear everything others missed. On this morning, like many others, Ray pushed his mop bucket down the gleaming hallway of Vance & Myers LLP, the law firm defending billionaire Jonathan Cross. Through the closed doors of the main conference room, Ray paused briefly as the raised voices of the senior partners pierced the air. "Jonathan Cross is on his own," one snapped. "I'm not risking the firm's name for a sinking ship." Another agreed, "The feds are too close. You want to go down with him? He's toxic." Ray clenched the mop handle tighter. "You built your empire with his money," he muttered under his breath. "And now you vanish." He kept moving, but the words hung in his mind like graffiti on a wall. Later that morning, the courtroom buzzed with reporters, flashing cameras, and hushed anticipation. Billionaire tech mogul Jonathan Cross sat alone at the defense table, once praised as a visionary who reshaped artificial intelligence, now disgraced and on trial for fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice. His legal team, among the most powerful in the country, had suddenly withdrawn. All of them. Without explanation. Judge Marion Hughes, stern and composed, glanced down from the bench, baffled. "Where is defense counsel?" she asked sharply. The prosecutor, oozing confidence, stood and replied with a smirk, "Your Honor, defense counsel filed notice of withdrawal this morning. Mr. Cross appears unrepresented." Judge Hughes turned to the defendant. "Mr. Cross, do you have new counsel?" Jonathan looked up, hollow-eyed, his voice barely audible. "No, they left this morning. I didn't expect, this is day 6 of a federal trial," the judge said, her tone hardening. "Do you intend to represent yourself?" I need time," he pleaded. The prosecutor interjected, eager to press forward. "This is a stall tactic. The defense had every resource. Now this? It's clear obstruction." Judge Hughes leaned forward, her gavel tapping softly. "Mr. Cross, unless you can secure representation immediately, I will have no choice but to proceed with you representing yourself." In the back hallway of the courthouse, Ray watched through the narrow courtroom window, silent. He saw Cross, the man once admired on magazine covers and news specials, now abandoned, small, and alone. Memories rushed back, Cross shaking hands with a young black scholarship recipient. Cross talking about tech equity in South Atlanta. A man who once said the future should be built for everyone. Ray put down his mop. For the first time in a long time, he opened a door not meant for him. Inside the courtroom, the silence was deafening. Judge Hughes was about to speak again when a voice rang out from the back. "I'll speak for him." Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the gallery. A man in a janitor's uniform stood just inside the courtroom door, hands by his sides, calm but firm. "Who are you?" the judge asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "Name's Raymond Ellis," he said plainly. "Janitor here. 28 years. Cleaned this courtroom since y'all built it." "Mr. Ellis," the judge said, almost in warning. "Are you a licensed attorney?" "No, ma'am," Ray replied. "But I've heard every case that's come through this courthouse. I know what justice sounds like. And what it don't." The prosecutor erupted. "This is absurd, Your Honor. He's not qualified." Ray took a step forward. "I've watched rich men lie and poor men hang. I've mopped blood off this floor when justice failed. And I've never said a word." He looked at Jonathan Cross, sitting stunned at the defense table. "But not today." The judge stared at him for a long, tense moment. "Mr. Cross, do you consent to this, man speaking on your behalf?" Cross looked at Ray with a strange mix of confusion, hope, and disbelief. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." The judge hesitated, then sighed. "Every man has the right to representation, even unconventional ones. Mr. Ellis, I will allow you to proceed, for now. But this is not a game." Ray nodded. "It never was." In a nearby press room, a young reporter fired off a breaking headline: "Janitor steps up to defend billionaire in courtroom shocker." Ray returned to the defense table and sat beside Jonathan Cross. For the first time, the entire courtroom truly looked at him, not as a janitor, but as a man who had just changed the course of the trial. And the story was only beginning. Raymond Ellis didn't sleep that night. After the courtroom cleared, after the news vans swarmed the courthouse steps, after strangers shouted his name and camera crews chased him down the street, he went home. To his quiet one-bedroom apartment on the south side. Same creaky floorboards. Same chipped paint. Same shelf of law books he'd been collecting from courthouse trash bins over the years, thinking maybe one day he'd understand the system that destroyed so many lives around him. That night, he opened those books again. Not as a janitor sweeping up after lawyers, but as a man walking into the fire they left behind. Int. Courtroom. The next morning the courthouse was even more packed than the day before. Spectators filled the benches. Reporters elbowed each other for seats. And at the front of it all sat Jonathan Cross, still in his expensive gray suit, still unsure if this was all some surreal fever dream. Beside him sat Ray. No suit. Just his pressed brown jumpsuit, an old notepad, and a pen that barely worked. He looked up at the judge with steady eyes. Judge Hughes entered. The courtroom rose. "Mr. Ellis," she began, "do you still intend to serve as defense counsel for Mr. Cross?" Ray stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. I do." A few quiet chuckles slipped through the courtroom. The prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Warren Whitaker, stood with smug confidence. "Your Honor, I must again object. Mr. Ellis is not a licensed attorney. This trial is a complex matter of federal finance, securities law, and international fraud. He cannot possibly, let the record show," Ray cut in gently, "I'm not pretending to be a lawyer. I'm a man speaking for another man. If the Constitution allows a man to represent himself, then surely he can choose who speaks in his place." The judge raised a brow, but said nothing. Ray continued. "You all think this is about legal code. But to Mr. Cross, this is about being left behind. And that. I understand." Whitaker scoffed. "Then by all means, Mr. Ellis. Let's see what justice looks like through a mop bucket." Int. Cross-examination. Later that day Ray's first act was unexpected. He asked for the names of every employee fired in the last 6 months from Cross's company. Then he asked for internal memos, the ones not part of the prosecution's official exhibit list. The judge hesitated, but allowed it. For the next 2 hours, Ray questioned witnesses, not with legal flair, but with plain, piercing questions. "Did you personally see Mr. Cross sign this document? When exactly was the server room accessed, and by who? Why does this memo, dated 2 weeks before the audit, warn of a setup involving Mr. Cross?" The courtroom began to shift. People leaned forward. Ray didn't talk like a lawyer. He talked like a man who listened for a living. Int. Courtroom. Day 3. By the third day, the media had exploded with coverage. The janitor defending a billionaire. Is he a fool or a genius? Raymond Ellis. From Mop to Mike. Outside, protesters gathered. Some called Ray a pawn. Others called him a hero. But inside the courtroom, a different story was unfolding. Ray presented an email thread between Cross's CFO and an offshore partner. The language suggested the illegal financial movement happened without Cross's direct knowledge. Then came a bold move. He requested the judge issue a subpoena, not for a banker or executive, but for Janine Porter, Cross's former executive assistant. Int. Courtroom. The next day Janine took the stand, nervous. Ray stood before her, holding only a single sheet of paper. "Ms. Porter, I don't have fancy slides. But I've heard your name in meetings while I mopped outside those firm walls. You were close to Mr. Cross, weren't you?" She nodded. "You scheduled his meetings. You saw who came in and out." "Yes. You were let go just days before the indictment." Her eyes dropped. "Yes." "Why?" "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Overruled," Judge Hughes replied. "Answer the question, Ms. Porter." Janine looked up, voice steady now. "I found out the board was setting Mr. Cross up. I told him. And I was fired." Gasps. Reporters started scribbling frantically. Int. Courtroom. End of the week. Ray's cross-examinations were surgical. He exposed lies hidden in arrogance, poked holes in carefully rehearsed testimony, and reminded the jury of something no one else did, that justice is not a privilege for the powerful or the practiced. It is a right, even for the abandoned. At one point, he turned toward the jury. "I ain't saying the man is perfect. None of us are. But you can't convict a man just because his friends ran when the fire came. That's not justice. That's cowardice." Even the judge seemed moved. Int. Courtroom. Night. As the court adjourned, Ray gathered his papers. Cross, sitting beside him, leaned in. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Ray looked at him, tired but clear. "Because I know what it feels like to be thrown away. And maybe you do now too." The courthouse steps had become a battlefield of opinion. Protesters, pundits, and podcasters all wanted to stake their flag in the story. Some called it a farce. Others, a revolution. But inside that courtroom, a janitor was building a defense that no one saw coming, not even the man he was defending. Jonathan Cross had been silent through most of the trial, but now, he began to see. Every morning, Ray Ellis came in early, not just to prepare, but to mop the floors, just as he always had. The same care he took cleaning the marble tiles, he brought to every cross-examination. Slow. Careful. Focused. No drama, just facts. On the sixth day of Ray's defense, the prosecutor tried to strike again, calling in a damning witness, Damon Reeves, Cross's former CFO, who had turned state's witness to avoid prison. He wore a designer suit and a smug look, confident he'd seal the coffin shut. "Prosecutor Whitaker, Mr. Reeves, can you confirm that Jonathan Cross personally signed off on the illegal offshore transfers?" Reeves: "Yes. He approved them. I was there." A hush fell over the courtroom. Ray stood, silent for a moment, then approached slowly. "Ray, you say you were there. Where, exactly?" Reeves, frowning, "In the London office. March 8th. Ray nodded. "And on that day, were you also scheduled to meet with the auditors in Zurich?" Yes." Ray pulled out a printed flight manifest and held it up. "Mr. Reeves, this is the private flight you took that week. You were in Zurich on March 8th. Not London." Reeves blinked, caught. Murmurs echoed around the courtroom. "Your Honor," Ray continued, voice steady, "either Mr. Reeves has mastered teleportation, or he wasn't where he said he was." The judge looked over her glasses. "Mr. Reeves, do you wish to revise your statement?" The witness stammered. I may have gotten the dates wrong." "No," Ray said gently. "You got the lie wrong." Int. Courtroom. Lunch break. Jonathan sat beside Ray, visibly shaken. For the first time, he leaned in, not to give advice, but to ask for it. I didn't know about the offshore accounts, he whispered. Not the way they made it sound. They made moves behind my back, but I didn't. I wasn't paying attention. Ray didn't respond right away. Then he said, neglect ain't innocence. But it ain't evil either. Cross stared down at the table. I built something, Ray. And I trusted the wrong people. Ray met his eyes. Then let's show them what happens when you finally start watching. Int. Courtroom, next session. Ray turned to the jury. For a long time, he began, Jonathan Cross was the golden boy. Y'all remember that. He gave scholarships, funded tech centers in schools, talked about closing the digital divide. Then the money got bigger. The people around him changed. And when the hammer came down, they all ran. He walked slowly across the courtroom. I ain't here to tell you he was perfect. I'm here to tell you what I saw in those files, those emails, those testimonies. He didn't steal. He didn't deceive. He trusted the wrong devils, and they used his name to cover their tracks. He paused, letting it sink in. Y'all want justice? Then don't give this man the punishment meant for others just because it's easier. Look at the facts. Follow the paper. Not the headlines. There was silence. No objections. No interruptions. Just truth. Int. Defense table, final day of trial. It was closing arguments. The prosecutor gave his speech first, slick, calculated, persuasive. He painted Cross as willfully blind at best, complicit at worst. Then it was Ray's turn. He didn't use notes. He didn't pace. He just stood up and looked the jurors in the eye. When I was a boy, he said, my uncle went to prison for something he didn't do. His lawyer barely showed up. The judge didn't care. They gave him 20 years. He died in there. He took a breath. I swore I'd never forget what silence cost us. Then he turned to Jonathan. This man had the best lawyers money could buy. But when things got hot, they vanished. Left him here, alone. I ain't rich. I ain't trained. But I ain't gonna walk past a man drowning just because I ain't wearing a life vest. He turned back to the jury. You don't have to like him. You just have to be fair. And with that, he sat down. Int. Courtroom, verdict day. The jury filed in. The cameras were rolling. Social media was on fire. Ray sat beside Jonathan Cross, both men still, silent. The foreperson stood. In the case of United States versus Jonathan Cross, on the charge of securities fraud, not guilty. Murmurs. On the charge of insider trading, not guilty. A few gasps. On the charge of obstruction of justice, not guilty. Silence. Then chaos. Reporters scrambled. Spectators cried out. But Ray simply sat there. Calm. Like he always had. Jonathan turned to him, tears in his eyes. You saved me. Ray stood. No, he said. I just told the truth. The jury saved you. Int. Courthouse steps. Later that day Ray emerged into a sea of flashing lights and microphones. But he didn't speak. He walked down the steps slowly, mop bucket in one hand, notepad in the other. A young boy in the crowd reached out to him. Mister, are you a lawyer? Ray smiled. No, son. Just a man who finally stood up. The trial was over. The verdict echoed through the country like a lightning bolt through dry timber. Some celebrated. Others fumed. But no one could ignore the story anymore, a janitor who stood up in court and spoke so clearly that 12 strangers put their faith not in law degrees, but in justice. The very next morning, Raymond Ellis went back to work. Same brown jumpsuit. Same mop. Same routine. But the courthouse wasn't the same. The guards nodded with more respect. The clerks whispered when he passed. Even the attorneys, the ones who once brushed past him without a glance, now offered cautious hellos. But Ray didn't care about all that. He had made his stand. And now, he had choices to make. Int. Coffee shop. Days later Ray sat at a small table with Jonathan Cross, now a free man. No cameras. No suits. Just two men, face to face. I owe you my life, Jonathan said quietly. You don't owe me anything, Ray replied, sipping his coffee. You owe them. Who? The people. The ones you said you wanted to build for. The ones you forgot when the money got too loud. Jonathan sat back. I meant it, back then. I just lost my way. Ray studied him for a moment. Then find your way back. Int. High school auditorium. A week later a crowd of students, parents, and teachers packed the small auditorium of Southside High. The sign behind the podium read, Equity Tech Scholarship Launch, in honor of Raymond Ellis. Jonathan Cross took the stage, humbled. My company is relaunching a nationwide initiative for black and brown youth in underfunded communities. Tech labs. Internships. Scholarships. But none of it will be in my name. It'll be in his. He turned to Ray, who stood off stage. This man reminded me what integrity looks like when you've got nothing left to gain. That kind of truth doesn't fade. It multiplies. Ray nodded, eyes low, as the crowd applauded. Int. Newsroom, national interview. Ray sat under studio lights for the first time in his life. The anchor leaned in. You're being called a hero. A symbol of grassroots justice. What do you say to that? Ray smiled faintly. I'm no hero. I'm just a man who listened too long and stayed quiet too long. This time. I spoke. The anchor followed up. You've had job offers from legal firms, universities, even political groups. What's next for Raymond Ellis? Ray looked into the camera. I've mopped floors for 30 years. Watched justice fail in that courtroom more times than I can count. I don't need a title to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm starting something of my own. EXT, Community Legal Clinic. Months later the sign was simple, the Ellis Justice Center, for the people who don't get heard. No marble floors. No glass walls. Just folding chairs, worn desks, and shelves filled with used law books. But it was full, with single mothers, ex-convicts, evicted tenants, and kids who never thought justice had space for them. Ray stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, teaching a free community legal literacy class. Behind him, a whiteboard read. Know your rights. Speak your truth. Don't back down. He turned to his students. You ain't powerless. You just need the tools. Int. Courtroom. 1 year later the judge tapped the gavel. A young man stood at the defense table. Nervous. Alone. Suddenly, the doors opened. Raymond Ellis walked in, no longer in a janitor's jumpsuit. Now wearing a clean, pressed suit. Not flashy. But proud. He took a seat beside the defendant, placed a worn leather binder on the table, and whispered, I'm not a lawyer. But I'll speak for you. The judge, recognizing him, allowed it. Because the world had changed. Not because of a courtroom victory, but because one man stood up when no one else would. Fade out. I'll speak for him. I'll speak for her. I'll speak for the forgotten. Raymond Ellis, the janitor who changed justice.